Sarah, thanks for sitting down with me today. I appreciate it. Great to see you again.
You too, Shawn. Always a pleasure.
So we are here in Windsor at CSTA meetings, and I appreciate you taking the time to give me a little bit of a update of how Sarah's doing. So we've got an interesting year going on right across Canada this year.
We do.
We know that seed testing is important. Can you talk a little bit about some of the trends that you're seeing for this year, maybe the why we're seeing those trends, and then maybe finally some advice that you might give to companies out there as they're making some decisions for the coming season?
Absolutely. Well, it's certainly going to be a challenge for 2015. As you know, we've got a drought out west and we've got flooding out east, and that's always going to be an issue in terms of quality at the end of the day. So we started off the year with some late seeding. Some of Manitoba had as many as 3 seedings for canola. So that in itself at the end of the day is going to present potentially, if we get an early fall frost, we're going to see some quality issues there with immaturity, possibly dormancy. The cereals are always, an issue too when it comes to early frost. The drought that we're having, essentially we're going to see seed that hasn't filled properly, underweight, shriveled, could have protein issues, that type of thing. And then we're going to probably see some dormancy there with that as well. And so it's really, I hate to say it, it's going to be all over the map. And this is when we're going to really rely on the knowledge of seed analysts to get the best results that we can for everything. So early testing is going to be very, very important.
Why is that early testing so critical?
Because it sets the benchmark for how that quality is going to be. Seed is always at its best when it's first taken off, so that's when we want to capture that picture of how it could potentially perform. At that stage, of germination is a good fundamental to begin with, but I also like to see, especially right after cleaning, early cleaning, a vigor test. So that's going to essentially set the stage for how that seed is going to behave. And we can tell so much through stress testing. So early testing is, I'd say, probably one of the most important things. And that's a message I really want to get out, because we often don't see seed tested until January or February. And I know that, the seed regulations imply that the germination must be guaranteed at the time of sale. So that's generally when people are selling. But it's a little bit late in terms of quality. And I think we can be very proactive if we test earlier on.
And so with an early test, do we do an early test and then a January test as well? That's the best way.
Yes,
then
and
we're covered.
Absolutely. And as far as the regulations go, we're supposed to test our seed every time we change or condition it. So, changing is conditioning. And if we treat it, then we should be testing after treatment. And that's not to see that there's been any ill effect or anything like that. It's just to see how are we measuring up throughout the season. And some of the big seed companies do a plethora of tests at every stage of the processing, treating, and any handling, essentially.
Right.
So
if we now zoom back out to more like 10 or 20,000 feet and talk about some of the issues that the industry has going on, what do you see as maybe the number one issue that the industry is focused on right now?
Well, at this meeting, there's obviously all sorts of things in terms of treatments, the neonicotinoids, that type of thing. There's been some discussion about UPOF 91. I know those are issues and they're ongoing, but perhaps from a seed analyst point of view, I think one of our biggest issues, and this is coming out of the CSAC meeting that I attended in Saskatoon a couple of weeks ago, is the decline in the number of accredited analysts. And I know we've had this conversation before. It's all about how do we incentivize people to join our industry. I think we do very well when it comes to agronomists and seed treatment care specialists, that type of thing, people working in sales. Those types of jobs we've never had a problem, I don't think, filling. But as far as seed analysts, we are still strapped in terms of where do we get our training, It's mostly on the job. But I've said this for 20 years, and Kathy Bredner and I were chatting last night, and talking about the issues that we're going to have 10 years from now. Because when you look at the group of analysts that we have, there's a distinct generation difference, and I'm concerned as we go into a much more sophisticated testing regime that we're not going to have the people in place. And one of the things that we've done from 2020's perspective is go way further afield and look abroad. So we're trying to hire people from abroad, and we've been successful so far. But that really is an issue, and part of that is that unfortunately we can't afford to pay people what they expect coming out of university, and that's due in nature to the different levels of companies that we have that are offering seed testing. And that's not to be rude or anything, it's just that there are different levels, and unfortunately we can't incentivize people to come when we can't charge enough for what we're doing, and that's essentially the bottom line.
Right, and a big issue right across the board. Seed testing, seed industry, Western Canada for that matter.
Yes.
It's a big issue.
Yes.
Right? So one of the fundamentals of seed testing is sampling, and I think that there has been, I know I've heard you talk on it, and I've heard the industry debate the realities of proper sampling to get proper seed testing. Is that a big issue that you see, A, and then B, getting into some specifics, because I've been hearing a lot of conversations going on about grasses, about conservation grasses and grasses, about that being a real specific issue there from a sampling perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that, sir?
Absolutely. Well, you've hit two very different topics. Well, first of all, sampling. The Canadian Seed Institute, we're working on a sampling manual. And I do believe that it's not a priority at the moment, so it's been shelved. But it's probably one of the most important topics that we should really revisit very quickly, because we don't have maximum lot size in Canada. So with that, we're not always getting a representative sample, because there are different techniques, and as you know from a technical point of view, there's probing and there's automatic sampling. So we need to address this very quickly, in that we have authorized samplers in Canada to do this, and I teach that grading course, and there's a small portion about sampling, and a lot of the sampling that's being done is automated. We have automatic sampling schemes, which will pass through the entire seed stream every couple of minutes, and we get good samples that way. But that is a problem, because not everybody's doing it with a standardized approach. So that's important. The second part of it, with the native grasses and the rangeland grasses that you're talking about, part of that is that those species are not in Schedule 1, and so they're not on the grade tables. So it's open to the analyst's interpretation in terms of what the seed size is. So we're given a number of different manuals to get our information from. So that's AOSA, Association of Official Seed Analysts, and the ISTA rules for testing, which is the International Seed Testing Association. So if the analyst interprets the seed size correctly, we have to determine the number of seeds per gram, and if we can't do that, then we go and revert to ISTA, and ISTA is 25,000 seeds. And I think what ends up happening in terms of the differences in the results, it's actually how we got that sample and how we came to get the working sample, and was the working sample the right sample. The other thing is that in Canada, we're a little bit unique in that when we talk about purity, we're talking about a search on the bulk of the sample, not a pure seed. So everywhere else in the world, it's a given that we do a % pure seed and a purity, and we don't do that automatically here in Canada. But we would do it on native grasses if it was understood that it needed to be done. So that's one of the things, because it doesn't appear in Schedule 1, is a little bit of a grey area.
Sarah, 2020, and from my perspective, has always been kind of leading the charge. And hearing you talk about seed testing, it's very obvious that that doing it right is a key ingredient for 2020. And we've had the conversation many times that's a critical piece. As president, what do you see coming down the pipe? What do you see as the changes coming for your organization? How are they going to impact on the industry? And so we went to 20,000, now I guess I'm asking you to go to 40,000. What does that look like from up there?
Well, we have tried to be leaders, always bringing in new ideas, new services. Of course, we've been for many years customer driven. So if it was something that the customer needed in order to get a better idea of seed quality, we've come to the table. But now we are members of the International Seed Testing Association, and we've done that for a very good reason. And anyone in Canada that's a seed analyst can become a member and access this broader scientific community. And I think that's really important, because that is where most of the work is being done from a scientific perspective, and that's allowed us to access more information in terms of tests that we're going to be needing as we go down with new varieties, new breeding schemes. We're talking about hybrid wheat, those types of things. And I think we just have to be more knowledgeable in terms of what it is that we're doing. Seed treatments are changing. They're putting different chemicals, different ingredients to offer vigor, an increase in vigor, those kinds of things. And I think we've just got to be so much more knowledgeable about what's actually being put on the seed. We're not just talking about bare seed anymore. But look, big picture, I think we're going to be looking at molecular testing. I think that's going to be a big part of any seed lab's portfolio. And that's to accommodate diseases, trait testing, varietal identification. They're all going to be very, very important. And I don't know if you know this, but I just recently became an international auditor for the International Seed Testing Association. So I've just actually done my 2 audits to start. And I think that's going to be very exciting, because it's going to allow us to have a bigger vision of what's going on around the world. And I'd like to be able to bring some of that back and share it with our analysts in terms of what's going on in Europe or in Southeast Asia, or anywhere for that matter. Because we've been a little bit hampered by the fact that the government has privatized a lot of their services, and we've just not had a chance to really focus on what it is that we need in terms of seed analyzing.
Hearing you talk about seed testing, Sarah, it becomes very obvious to me that that there's a difference between good seed testing and not so good seed testing. How can we ask the industry to start to make that distinction in Canada? How can we ask them to see the difference between good seed and the benefits of good seed testing compared to just seed testing? That's
really interesting. I'd like to be known as someone who's a good seed tester, right, if that's the term. Right. And that's because we've invested so much in terms of our membership with different associations, our credentials. Every single one of our people at 2020 has a degree, and they bring something into the company, whether it's agriculture or agronomy or whatever it is. And so they've got a good head start. And I think in terms of what we do, we follow rules, we follow regulations, and it's all about having a standard procedure. And that's a really difficult one to answer, but I think the poor seed testing isn't because the company isn't doing, they just don't know, and that's the problem. They may miss the fact that, you know, they should be using a particular kind of paper. They might not have done a phytotoxicity test. The sand may be off. There's lots of different reasons why things can go wrong. But when you do it right, you have controls in place, whether that's part of your own internal control systems that you put in place. You have manuals, you have procedures, you have protocols. You may be part of ISO. Today we're looking at 17025.
And some of those have evolved. Good seed testing 5 years ago might not be good seed testing now.
That's right, and we're always changing. I mean, we are looking at becoming 17025. That allows us to monitor, you know, every batch of chemical or paper, everything that we use in terms of getting the end product. But a lot of companies don't see that as a value, because they see it as an expense. And unfortunately, when you're only charging $25 for a germination test, there isn't a lot of margin there to be able to implement that. So we've sacrificed a lot of things to put those in place, and that's why our customers come back to us, you know, over year after year after year, because we can offer the consistency. They've got history with us, and they know that, you know, we take it very seriously.
Right. Sarah, thanks for giving us a little bit of an insight into 2020, the business. Your passion comes across loud and clear, and I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me.
You're really welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah.